She sat quietly in the back of the classroom, her hands resting gently on her lap. She didn't say much, didn't look around too much, and didn't try to make any friends. Some of the younger students thought she was strange. Others didn't even notice her. She wore plain clothes, didn't wear makeup, and didn't carry a fancy bag like many others did. To most people, she looked like a shy beginner who probably didn't know much about music. The music school she joined was small but well known in the city. It welcomed people of all ages, but most of the students were teens and young adults. When the teachers saw her name on the new list, they didn't think much of it. During the first class, one of the teachers asked everyone to play a simple scale. When it was her turn, she hesitated for a moment and then played it softly. It was perfect, but the teachers didn't pay attention. They were too busy correcting the louder, more eager students. They put her in the beginner group and told her to follow along. She simply nodded and took her seat without any protest. While the other students tried to show off or ask questions, she listened carefully and practiced quietly. Sometimes when someone near her struggled with a note or a hand position, she would gently lean over and help them. Her touch was light and her words were soft. Most of them didn't even ask for help, she just noticed and offered it. Days passed like this. The other students started giving her nicknames like Auntie or the ghost in the back. Some laughed behind her back. A few kinder students said she was probably just learning late in life and should be left alone. But the truth was, no one really talked to her. She didn't seem to mind. She never spoke about her life, her past, or why she was there. She came right on time, stayed silent during breaks, and left as soon as class ended. Her bag was old. Her notebook was neat, and her fingers always looked calm and steady. Some students noticed how her hands rested naturally on the keyboard, unlike beginners who often held tension. But again, no one thought much about it. One day, during a small group practice, the teacher asked the students to try a new song. It wasn't hard, just a simple children's tune. Everyone took turns. Some fumbled, others played well. When it was her turn, she played it softly, her fingers moving gently, like they already knew where to go. The melody sounded sweeter when she played it, but no one really said anything. The teacher just nodded and moved on. It was strange. She didn't try to impress anyone, yet she played with a kind of quiet confidence. Still, the teachers didn't take her seriously. They thought she was just lucky, or maybe had practiced this one song before. Some of the younger students started teasing her more, calling her Grandma Mozart or pretending to fall asleep when she played. She never reacted, just smiled politely and kept going. What they didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that this quiet woman, the one they thought was too old or too shy to matter, had once played on the biggest stages in the country. But that part of her life was buried deep, locked away by years of silence and pain. She hadn't touched a grand piano in a long, long time, and now here she was, starting over. Not to show off, not to prove anything, just to feel music again. But soon the day would come when the whole class and every teacher in the school would learn who she truly was, and they would never forget it. One morning, the music school staff made a surprise announcement. Head teacher walked into the practice room with a clipboard in his hand and said, "Today, we'll be doing something different. Each of you will play a classical piece we choose for your right here in front of everyone." The room went quiet. Some students got excited, some got nervous, a few groaned, but no one dared to say no. It was clear the teachers wanted to see who had been practicing seriously. The quiet woman sat in her usual seat near the back. She looked calm, as if the announcement didn't bother her at all. But deep inside, she felt a tiny bit nervous. Not because she couldn't play, but because she didn't want to be noticed. The teachers began calling names. One by one, the students walked to the piano, sat down, and tried their best. Some did well, others made mistakes. The teachers clapped politely but gave sharp feedback. It was clear they were testing everyone today, not just for skill but for attitude and discipline. Then, one of the teachers looked up, smirked a little, and said, "All right, let's have our silent pianist now." He read her name from the sheet, and some students giggled. A few even whispered jokes. One said, "Let's see if she even knows how to read the music." Another added, "She probably only knows birthday songs." The teacher walked over to the shelf and picked a music sheet. But not just any sheet. It was a piece known for its difficulty, something usually reserved for advanced students or performers. It had fast finger movements, changing rhythms, and deep emotional shifts. It wasn't fair for a beginner. But he handed it to her anyway, saying, "Here, give this a try." Some students raised their eyebrows. A few looked shocked. One student whispered, "Why would they give her that? That's not even right." But the teacher just smiled and walked back. She took the sheet without saying a word. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't change. She stood up, walked slowly to the piano, and sat down. The room was now completely quiet. No one expected anything great. Most thought she would try a few notes and give up. Some were already preparing to laugh. She looked at the sheet for a moment. Then she placed her hands on the keys, and she paused. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Just silence. Then, without warning, her fingers began to move. The first few notes rang out, strong and steady. Perfect timing. Clean sound. Her hands flowed across the keys like water, touching each note with care. The room stayed silent, not from boredom, but from pure shock. The music filled the air. The same students who were ready to laugh now stared with wide eyes. The teacher who had handed her the sheet leaned forward, confused. Another teacher dropped their pen. Some students stopped breathing for a moment, as if they couldn't believe. What they were seeing, she didn't just play the song, she brought it to life. Every note told a story. Every pause, every lift of her fingers felt full of feeling. It was like the piano had been waiting for her. The air in the room had changed. Time itself felt slower, and she kept playing, completely focused, completely calm. No one knew what to say. The woman who had stayed in the shadows was now shining in front of everyone. And this was only the beginning. Something had awakened, and none of them were ready for what they were about to witness next. She placed her fingers gently on the piano keys. For a moment, the whole room felt frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft rustle of the music sheet resting on the stand. Her eyes didn't look at the crowd. They stayed focused on the notes, but it was clear she already knew the piece. Then she began. The first few notes were smooth and delicate, almost like a whisper. Her touch was light but confident. As the song continued, her fingers moved faster, flowing from one note to the next, like they were dancing across the keys. Each sound came out clear and full of emotion. It wasn't just correct, it was beautiful. Students who had been whispering before were now completely still. Even the ones who had teased her earlier were watching, mouths slightly open. The playful looks on their faces were gone, replaced by surprise and awe. Some of them looked at each other but didn't say a word. In a dream they didn't want to break. The teachers sat straighter in their chairs. One of them leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Another had their hand over their mouth, not because they were shocked, but because they were moved. Something in the way she played touched the heart. It wasn't just skill, it was feeling. It was soul. The notes grew louder, stronger. Her hands moved faster. It was the hardest part of the piece, the part that most students skipped or played slowly. But she didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew over the keys, sharp and perfect. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look proud either. She just looked peaceful, like she was lost in the music. Some of the younger students couldn't believe what they were seeing. One whispered, "Is this really happening?" Another said quietly, "She's not a beginner. She's something else." Even the school's head teacher, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped inside without making a sound. He had seen many students over the years, but this was different. As she reached the end of the piece, the music began to slow. Her fingers softened again, just like at the beginning. The final notes came out like a gentle, quiet, and full of emotion. Then she lifted her hands off the keys, placed them gently on her lap, and looked down. Silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that comes when something powerful has just ended. And then someone clapped. One student, then another, then all of them. The sound of clapping filled the room. A few even stood up. Some had tears in their eyes. It wasn't loud cheering, but it was deep and honest. It came from the heart. The woman stood up slowly, gave a small bow, and walked back to her seat. She didn't smile. She didn't look proud. She just looked peaceful, as if a weight had been lifted from her chest. The teachers didn't know what to say. One of them muttered, "That was unexpected." Another just stared at her, trying to figure out who she really was. The truth was starting to show, but still, most didn't know how deep it went. In just a few minutes, she had turned laughter into silence, doubt into respect, a room full of people into witnesses of something rare and beautiful. But this was only the surface. The real story, the one no one knew yet, was still hiding behind those calm eyes and quiet hands. And soon someone would go looking for answers. The room stayed quiet, even after she returned to her seat. The sound of her music still echoed in everyone's mind. It was like her performance had opened a new door in their hearts, one they didn't know was there before. No one dared to speak for a few seconds. Some students kept looking at her as if they had just seen a ghost. A few were still clapping softly, almost without realizing it. Others sat frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. The teachers were just as shocked. One of them finally broke the silence and said that was something else. His voice was low and unsure. He wasn't used to being speechless in front of students. Another teacher who had taught at the school for many years leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Where has she been hiding this?" The other teacher just shook his head, still stunned. They had all misjudged her. They thought she was just a quiet, older woman with no real background in music. They thought she'd never played before. Some even believed she might be wasting space in the classroom. But now, all of those thoughts were gone, completely wiped away by the sound of a piano. The head teacher stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He looked at her for a moment and then gave her a small nod. He said, but his face showed more than that. His eyes were filled with deep respect. She didn't say anything in return. She just nodded back gently and looked down at her hands, which still rested quietly in her lap. Later that day, during the lunch break, students gathered in small groups, whispering and pointing. The same students who used to ignore her were now talking about her like she was a celebrity. One said she didn't even look at the sheet. How did she play all that from memory? Another added that was better than anything I've seen on YouTube. Even the students who had teased her before now stayed quiet around her. A few of them looked guilty, remembering the names they had called her. No one dared to make fun of her again. Some brave students tried to talk to her during lunch. One asked, "Where did you learn to play like that?" She smiled kindly and replied, "Just years of practice." She didn't say more. She didn't talk about her past or where she had come from. She didn't want the attention. That wasn't why she played. She only said, "Music is part of me. I just wanted to feel it again." That simple line stayed in many students' minds for the rest of the day. The teachers met in the staff room after class. They discussed her performance. "Seriously now," one said. "She's not a beginner, not even close." Another added, "I think we made a mistake putting her in the beginners group." They decided to look into her background. They wanted to know who she really was. Play like that and be unknown? One of them said, "We owe her an apology. And maybe we owe her some respect." That evening, she walked home the same way she always did, alone, quietly, with slow, steady steps. But something had changed. Not in her, but in the way people looked at her now. For the first time since she joined the music school, people saw her. They didn't just see an older woman sitting in the back. They saw a pianist, a real one, a person with depth, with talent, and with a story they hadn't heard yet. But there was still so much more they didn't know. And someone soon would. Want to know everything? The next day? Everyone at the music school was talking about her. Her piano performance had left a deep impression on everyone from students to teachers. Even the receptionist at the front desk had heard about it, even though she wasn't in the room when it happened. People were curious. They wanted to know more about the quiet woman who had surprised them all. One of the younger teachers couldn't stop thinking about it. That evening, after classes were over, he sat down with his laptop and typed her name into a search engine. At first, nothing came up. But then, after scrolling a bit deeper, he saw something that made him sit straight. A photo popped up. A much younger version of her. Same gentle expression. Next to the photo was a headline: Young piano prodigy shines on national stage. He clicked the article, and his eyes widened. It was from over 15 years ago. The story talked about a rising star in the classical music world, a woman who had stunned audiences with her perfect technique and emotional performances. She had played in competitions, performed at big events, and even once stood on an international stage. There were videos, too. He watched one. There she was, playing with the same grace, the same feeling she had shown just yesterday. She hadn't changed much, except now she looked quieter, more private. But the talent was exactly the same. He scrolled further. More articles followed, each one praising her skills and calling her a once-in-a-generation artist. But then, suddenly everything stopped. No more news, no more performances, just silence. It was as if she had disappeared. Another article, buried deep, gave a clue. It mentioned a personal tragedy, a family loss that had hit her hard. After that, she had canceled her tours and vanished from the public eye. The teacher leaned back in his chair, stunned. She had been famous, respected, loved by audiences, and yet here she was now, sitting quietly in a beginner class, asking for nothing, hiding her past from everyone. The next morning, that teacher walked into class differently. He looked at her not with curiosity, but with deep respect. He didn't say anything to the others yet. He felt it was her story to tell, not his. But word began to spread, quietly at first. A few students started to hear about her past. Some searched online too. Some found the same videos. One by one, more people began to understand who she really was, but she still didn't speak about it. She kept coming to class, sitting in the same seat, helping others quietly. When students asked her questions, she smiled and answered kindly, but never talked about her past life as a performer. She didn't act like a star. She didn't carry pride or ego. She listened carefully to teachers, even when they gave advice she already knew. She corrected students gently when they asked, and she never made anyone feel less than her. That's what touched people the most, not just her playing, but her humility. Some students started calling her ma'am out of respect. Others simply began to treat her like a mentor, even though she was still officially a student. One day, a student told her, "You inspire me more than anyone I've ever met." She just smiled and replied, "Music should bring peace. That's all I hope." 4. And that was it. No long speech. No big talk. Just a few soft words. But those words stayed with the student for days. The school was beginning to change because of her. Not in rules or systems, but in attitude. Students started helping each other more. Teachers began listening more closely. And the quiet woman once ignored had become the heart of it all, without saying much. She was teaching everyone something far more powerful than music. From that day onward, people at the music school began to treat her differently. Not because she asked for it, but because they couldn't forget what she had shown them. She had become something special to the students. They no longer saw her as the quiet lady in the back of the room. Now they looked at her with respect, sometimes even with admiration. Yet she stayed the same calm, kind, and never showing off. One morning, a student came up to her shyly and said, "Can you help me with this piece? I keep getting it wrong." She nodded gently and sat beside him at the second piano. Without saying much, she played a small section slowly, showing him how the hands should move. Then she'll let him try. He messed up again, but she didn't laugh. Instead, she smiled and said, "Take your time. The hands must feel the music, not just remember it." The boy listened and tried again. This time it was better. Word spread among the students that she gave the best tips. More and more people started asking for her help. Even the teachers began noticing. One day during a class break, a senior teacher pulled her aside and said, "You know, you've become quite the guide around here." She just smiled politely and said, "I just enjoy helping." That was the truth. She just wanted to be close to the music again. Teaching, even in small ways, gave her joy. It helped her feel connected not only to the piano, but to the people around her. Later that week, one of the teachers approached her after class and said, "Would you mind helping us with the beginners next week? We could use your experience." Was surprised, but happy. She quietly agreed, saying, only if it's okay with everyone else. The next week, she stood at the front of the beginner class for the first time. At first, the new students looked at her with confusion. "Is she a teacher?" one whispered. But within 5 minutes, they were all listening carefully. Her voice was soft but clear. Her hands showed each note with patience, didn't rush anyone. She didn't get annoyed. And slowly, the nervous beginners started to feel comfortable. She became their favorite part of the class. The regular teachers noticed the change too. Students who were once afraid to try now practiced harder. They smiled more. They asked more questions. It was like her calm presence gave them courage. Even the head teacher of the school, who usually stayed busy with admin work, made time to attend one of her practice sessions. He sat quietly at the back of the room, watching how she worked with the students. When the session ended, he walked up to her and said, "You have something special, not just in how you play, but in how you teach." She looked down for a moment and said softly, "Music gave me everything once. Now I just want to give back." It wasn't a big speech, but it touched the head teacher deeply. Behind her gentle smile was someone who had faced loss, someone who had once stepped away from the spotlight, and now had found meaning again, not in fame, but in guiding others. The school had changed around her. There was less competition now, and more kindness. Students had started helping one another, sitting in pairs, correcting each other's posture, giving tips instead of mocking mistakes. And right in the center of all this quiet change was the modest woman who never asked for anything, never told her full story, and never demanded respect, yet earned it from everyone. She had become more than just a student. She had become the soul of the school, and soon, a very special invitation was about to come her way. One that would bring her full circle. One morning, as she entered the music school like always, the receptionist handed her a small envelope. It had the school's name printed on it, but there was no other writing. She quietly opened it, standing by the door, and read the short letter inside. It was an invitation. The school was planning its yearly Grand Concerta, a special evening event where selected students and teachers performed in front of families, guests, and even a few well-known musicians from the city. It was the biggest event of the year. This time, they wanted her to close the show as the final performer. She blinked, reading the words again just to be sure. Her hands trembled slightly, but she held the paper close and took a deep breath. At lunch, the head teacher came to her, gently, and said, "Only if you're comfortable. We don't want to pressure you, but we all feel it's time people heard you again." She nodded slowly and said, "Yes, but I want to play with my students." He looked surprised. "You want them on stage with you?" She smiled softly. "They gave me back the music I had lost. I don't want to shine alone. I want to share the light." The head teacher said nothing for a moment, then nodded with respect. For the next few weeks, she stayed after class to rehearse with a small group of students, those she had helped, guided, and quietly inspired. They were nervous at first. "What if we mess up in front of so many people?" one asked. She simply replied, "You won't. Just feel the music and trust each other." We practiced again and again, not just to get the notes right, but to learn how to listen to one another, to move as one, and to play with emotion. It's not just memory. Finally, the night of the concert arrived. The hall was full. Lights were warm. Families sat dressed in their best clothes. Cameras were ready. The earlier performances were good, some were even great. But everyone knew the final act was the one people were waiting for. When she walked onto the stage with her small group of students, a quiet hush fell over the crowd. She wore a simple dress, not fancy or shiny, just like her. Her students followed closely, holding their instruments with shaking hands but smiling. They sat down. The hall grew completely silent. Then she nodded gently, and the music began. It was soft at first, gentle, like a quiet breeze. Then it grew stronger, fuller, as each student joined in, following her lead. She played the piano with grace, but she didn't overpower the others. She gave them space. She lifted them with her, together. They made music that felt like a story of loss, hope, and return. Many in the audience were moved to tears without even knowing why. When the final note faded, there was a pause. Then the entire hall stood and clapped. Loud, long, honest. Some people cried. Some smiled with wonder. One woman in the crowd whispered, "That wasn't just music. That was something else." On stage, she stood slowly and bowed. Her students followed her. Their eyes were full of joy and pride. Not because they had performed perfectly, but because they had been part of something real. That night, after the stage lights turned off and the crowd went home, she sat alone by the piano for a few minutes. She touched the keys softly, closed her eyes, and smiled. She didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. She had found her music again, and this time, she wasn't alone. Her quiet journey had taught everyone something important, that greatness doesn't always speak loudly. And the most powerful people are often the ones who never try to prove anything at all. She walked home under the night sky. The wind gentle, the stars quiet, but something had changed forever inside the school. Inside her and inside every person who had listened.